You tell yourself that you no longer care whether anyone understands you. That is not quite true. You care, but you have become exhausted by the price of being understood. You are tired of translating what happened inside you into language that belongs to the person you used to be. You are tired of reducing an experience that changed your inner structure into a version that sounds reasonable at dinner, acceptable in a message, or harmless enough to avoid making anyone uncomfortable. What looks like indifference is often the moment your psyche refuses to keep explaining itself to people who only listen for the return of your old identity. Carl Jung spent decades studying exactly this kind of withdrawal. He saw that real psychological transformation does not merely give you new ideas. It reorganizes your relationship with the collective world, with approval, with language, and with the personality you once used to survive. When the deeper self begins to emerge, the need to be understood often weakens, because the part of you that once depended on recognition is no longer in command. You do not suddenly become cold. You become less willing to betray an inner truth in exchange for social reassurance. This can frighten you, because you may have built your entire sense of belonging around being explainable. You learned to offer reasons before anyone asked. You softened your convictions before speaking them. You turned pain into stories that other people could digest. You learned which details made you seem balanced, humble, agreeable, and sane. Then something in you changed. The explanations began to feel false, even when every sentence was factually correct. You could describe what happened, but you could no longer communicate what it meant without feeling that you had made it smaller. You may call this spiritual awakening, but the psychological movement underneath it is individuation. Jung used that word to describe the lifelong process of becoming a more complete person, not a more admired person, not a more spiritual person, and not a person who rises above everyone else. Individuation begins when the center of your life shifts away from the persona, the socially adapted face you present to the world, and toward the self, the deeper organizing totality of the psyche. As this shift takes place, approval loses some of its authority. The old hunger to be accurately perceived begins to loosen. That loosening is not automatically wisdom. It can become withdrawal, contempt, or emotional avoidance if you do not understand what is happening. But in its healthier form, it is a correction. Your psyche is reclaiming energy that was once spent managing other people's interpretations of you. Every explanation, defense, clarification, and carefully edited confession required psychic effort. You may not have noticed how much of your life was organized around preventing misunderstanding until you became too inwardly changed to continue. A woman sits in her parked car after visiting her family. Her hand reaches for her phone because she wants to send a long message explaining why she was quiet at dinner. She writes 3 paragraphs, reads them twice, then deletes them. For the first time, she lets the silence remain without rushing to repair the image others may have formed of her. This is where the change becomes psychologically significant. You are not merely speaking less. You are withdrawing your identity from the courtroom of other people's minds. You are discovering that being misunderstood does not always create an emergency. The danger is that you may interpret this freedom as proof that you no longer need relationship at all. Jung would have challenged that conclusion. Individuation does not remove you from human connection. It asks you to stop using connection as a substitute for an inner center. Your first loss of interest is often a loss of interest in self-abandonment. For years, you may have called it communication. You explained your motives, defended your boundaries, and offered context for every decision. Yet much of that explaining was not communication. It was negotiation. You were trying to persuade others to grant you the right to feel what you felt, choose what you chose, or leave what had already become psychologically dead. The explanation became a hidden request for permission. Jung understood the persona as a necessary social structure, but he also warned that identification with it can sever you from the deeper personality. When you need everyone to understand you, you begin editing yourself in anticipation of their response. You do not ask what is true. You ask what version of the truth will preserve your position in the relationship. The persona then becomes more than a mask. It becomes a manager that keeps your inner life within socially acceptable limits. A man decides not to attend a gathering that has left him depleted for years. He types that he is busy, then changes it to say he needs rest, then adds a sentence explaining that nothing is wrong. His thumb hovers above the screen while he imagines the questions that will follow. Finally, he sends only, "I will not be there tonight," and places the phone face down. The discomfort you feel in moments like this is not evidence that you are doing something cruel. It is the sensation of an old adaptation losing its control over your voice. What you have been calling poor communication may actually be your refusal to keep turning every boundary into a courtroom argument. The change goes deeper, because language cannot always keep pace with inner transformation. A genuine awakening often begins before you can explain it. The psyche changes through images, dreams, bodily reactions, sudden aversions, unexpected grief, and quiet shifts in attention. You may lose interest in conversations that once entertained you. You may feel tired around people you still love. You may become unable to continue a role that once made you feel secure. These changes arrive as facts of experience before they become concepts. Jung treated symbols as the natural language of the unconscious, because the deepest movements of the psyche cannot be captured immediately by rational explanation. A symbol holds more than one meaning at once. An explanation reduces. This is why you can know that something is over without being able to produce a reason that satisfies another person. Your conscious mind may still be searching for vocabulary, while the unconscious has already withdrawn its energy. A woman wakes from the same dream for the fourth night in a row. In it, she is standing outside a house where every room is lit, but none of the doors will open. At breakfast, her partner asks why she seems distant, and she says she does not know. She looks down at her coffee because the dream feels more truthful than any answer she could give. Your silence in such moments is not always secrecy. Sometimes it is incubation. What you are unable to explain may still be forming, and forcing it into premature language can deform the very truth that is trying to emerge. You also lose interest in being understood when you realize that some people only understand the version of you that serves their emotional arrangement. This realization is painful because it exposes the limits of many relationships. Some people do not misunderstand you because you failed to explain yourself. They misunderstand you because your change threatens the role they assign to you. They may know you as the reliable one, the forgiving one, the available one, the confused one, the difficult one, or the person who always returns. When you step outside that role, they experience your growth as betrayal. Jung's work on projection and complexes helps explain why. People do not encounter you as a blank reality. They encounter you through emotionally charged patterns formed by their history. A complex selects what they can see. If your existence activates fear, guilt, dependency, or inadequacy in them, your clearest explanation may still be filtered through that emotional structure. They hear your words, but the complex interprets them before reflection can begin. A daughter tells her mother that she needs fewer calls during the week. She speaks slowly and says that the distance is not punishment. Her mother nods, then later tells a relative that the daughter has become arrogant. The daughter hears about it, opens the message thread, and decides not to send the explanation she has written many times before. The grief here is specific. You are not only accepting that someone misunderstands you, you are accepting that their understanding may have depended on your continued obedience to a role that was shrinking your life. Once you see this, explaining can begin to feel like feeding the very pattern you are trying to leave. Each time you defend your transformation to someone committed to your old identity, you return psychic energy to that identity. You step back into the old scene. You become the accused child, the apologetic partner, the uncertain friend, or the employee who must prove that exhaustion is real. Even when you speak with confidence, the structure of the interaction places the other person in the position of judge. Jung used the term libido to describe psychic energy in a broad sense, not merely sexual energy. Where your attention goes, your life force follows. Endless self-explanation keeps your energy tied to an external verdict. You may believe you are fighting for freedom, while your mind remains occupied for hours by imaginary conversations with people who have already decided what your change means. A man leaves a meeting after calmly refusing a project that would consume his weekends. On the train home, he rehearses what he should have said to make his manager respect the decision. He imagines better phrases, stronger evidence, and a perfect final sentence. Then he notices that the meeting ended 20 minutes ago, but he is still psychologically sitting at the table. Your exhaustion is not caused only by being misunderstood. It is caused by continuing the conversation inside yourself after the other person has left. What you are calling detachment may be the psyche's attempt to stop donating life force to an unwinnable trial. The need to be understood also weakens when you stop confusing recognition with reality. Before a deeper awakening, another person's accurate perception may feel like confirmation that your inner experience is legitimate. When someone says, "I understand," your body relaxes. When they question you, your certainty collapses. This makes your reality dependent on reflection. You exist, but you do not fully trust that you exist until another mind mirrors you correctly. Jung saw the danger of seeking the self through collective confirmation. The self is not an opinion about you. It is the deeper pattern that continues organizing your life, even when your conscious identity is confused. Contact with it produces a quieter form of authority. You may still appreciate being understood, but you no longer require another person's agreement to know what you experienced. A woman tells a close friend that her work no longer feels meaningful. The friend answers with practical advice and says she should be grateful for stability. The woman feels the familiar urge to list every reason, every sleepless night, every moment of dread before Monday morning. Instead, she notices the heaviness in her chest and allows that sensation to count as information. This is not irrationality. It is a reordering of evidence. What you have been calling oversensitivity may be your psyche refusing to let someone else's interpretation overrule the accumulated truth of your own experience. Yet the loss of interest in being understood is not the same as believing you are beyond understanding. Spiritual language can easily become a defense against ordinary human vulnerability. You may tell yourself that others are asleep, unready, unconscious, or unable to meet you at your level. That explanation protects you from the humiliation of admitting something simpler. You wanted to be seen, and you were not. You wanted someone to ask a second question. You wanted them to notice the effort behind your silence. When they did not, you converted hurt into superiority. Jung repeatedly warned against inflation, the condition in which the ego identifies with an archetypal force and begins to feel enlarged by it. After a powerful inner experience, you may mistake contact with something greater for evidence that you are personally greater. Then being misunderstood becomes part of a flattering identity. You become the isolated truth-bearer among ordinary people. The wound remains, but now it wears spiritual clothing. A man leaves a group conversation feeling ignored. At home, he tells himself that the others could not understand the depth of what he was saying. He closes the curtains, opens a book on awakening, and underlines a sentence about solitude. He does not admit that he spoke in abstractions because he was afraid to say that he felt lonely. Your depth does not exempt you from the need for honest contact. What you are calling spiritual distance may sometimes be grief that has not yet found language simple enough to be shared. Mature silence is not the refusal to be known. It is the refusal to force recognition where no real meeting is possible. There is a difference between concealment and containment. Concealment is driven by fear. It hides because exposure feels dangerous. Containment protects an experience until the right relationship, moment, and language are present. You do not tell everyone everything, but neither do you build an identity around being unreachable. Jung's psychology respected the need for a protected inner space. The psyche often requires a vessel in which opposites can remain together without immediate resolution. You may love someone and still need distance. You may forgive and still refuse access. You may understand another person's limitations and still stop explaining yourself to them. Containment allows these truths to coexist without forcing a clean public narrative. A woman sits across from a friend who asks why she has changed. She feels a full answer rising, but she notices the friend's impatient glance toward the phone. She says, "I am still understanding it myself," and lets the sentence stand. Later that week, she speaks for 2 hours with someone who listens without rushing to define her. Your withdrawal becomes healthy when it protects the conditions for truth, rather than protecting you from every possibility of disappointment. What you are calling distance may be discernment, learning where your inner life can safely become language. As this discernment grows, you begin to understand why awakening often brings a season of social quiet. The personality you used to present was woven into a network of expectations. Friends knew how you would respond. Family members knew what would make you feel guilty. Colleagues knew how much extra work you would accept. Partners knew which fears would bring you back into agreement. When those patterns stop functioning, the social field becomes unstable. Jung described individuation as differentiation from the collective, but differentiation does not mean rejection of society. It means discovering where your values, feelings, and decisions are genuinely yours, and where they were borrowed to maintain belonging. During this process, conversation can feel strangely exhausting, because every interaction asks, without words, whether you will return to the old agreement. A man visits friends he has known since adolescence. They repeat an old joke about his indecisiveness, and everyone waits for him to laugh. He smiles briefly, then says that the joke no longer fits. The room goes quiet for 3 seconds, and he feels the old impulse to rescue everyone from discomfort. The awkwardness you encounter is not proof that you have lost your ability to connect. It may be the sound of a collective identity adjusting to the fact that you are no longer willing to disappear inside it. This is where the deepest cost begins to appear. You may have believed that once you stopped needing to be understood, you would feel peaceful. Instead, you discover that freedom from explanation creates a new responsibility. You can no longer blame other people's misunderstanding for every feeling of isolation. You must ask whether your silence is rooted in inner authority or in unhealed fear. You must distinguish the calm that comes from self-possession from the numbness that comes from giving up on intimacy. The shadow beneath your withdrawal may be resentment. You explained yourself for years and were not heard. You offered evidence, patience, context, and vulnerability. Somewhere inside, you may now want others to feel the absence of what they failed to value. Your silence can become a punishment that you call peace. Your distance can become a test that no one knows they are taking. Jung's idea of the shadow includes precisely these rejected motives. The shadow is not only rage, envy, or aggression. It also contains the wish to be pursued, the wish to be proven right, the wish to make someone regret losing access to you. If you do not acknowledge these motives, they will direct your behavior while your conscious mind claims spiritual detachment. You may stop explaining not because explanation is unnecessary, but because you are afraid that even your clearest truth will not be received. You may decide that no one can understand you because that conclusion protects you from discovering who might. The belief makes you safe from rejection, but it also makes real contact impossible. No one can fail to meet you if you never allow yourself to be encountered. This is the choice you cannot avoid. You must decide whether your silence serves truth or protects pride. You must decide whether you are leaving the courtroom or secretly waiting for the judge to call you back and apologize. You must decide whether your solitude is a living space where a deeper personality is forming, or a sealed room where disappointment repeats itself without challenge. That choice will cost you something real. If you stop over-explaining, some people will call you selfish. Some relationships will weaken because they were sustained by your emotional labor. Some people will prefer the version of you that could be pressured into clarity, apology, or compliance. You may lose the comforting belief that the perfect explanation could have saved every bond. But honesty will also cost you the identity of the misunderstood one. You cannot build your life around being unseen and still remain open to being seen. You cannot treat every failed connection as evidence of your exceptional depth. You cannot ask for authentic relationship while withholding every imperfect, ordinary sentence that might begin it. At some point, you must risk speaking without controlling how your words will land. This is not a command to explain yourself again. It is a demand for precision. There are moments when silence is integrity. There are moments when silence is fear. There are people who have earned no further access to your inner world. There are also people who cannot understand what you have never allowed them to hear. The awakened position is not to choose silence over speech. It is to stop using either one automatically. You are allowed to stop producing evidence for your own existence. You are allowed to make a decision without assembling a defense. You are allowed to let someone hold an incomplete picture of you when correcting it would require you to abandon your center. You are allowed to recognize that not every relationship has the psychological capacity for mutual understanding. You are also allowed to want to be known. The desire itself is not weakness. It becomes destructive only when you trade your inner authority for the temporary relief of being mirrored. You can speak because relationship matters, without speaking as though your reality depends on the verdict. You can clarify without pleading. You can reveal yourself without turning revelation into a performance. Jung's individuation does not end in isolation. It creates the possibility of a more honest participation in life. Once you are no longer governed by the need to be understood by everyone, you can begin to notice where understanding is actually present. It may arrive quietly. Someone remembers a detail you mentioned months ago. Someone lets your silence breathe. Someone disagrees without trying to reduce you. Someone asks what an experience meant to you, instead of telling you what it should have meant. You do not need to force these encounters. You only need to remain available to them. The task is not to return to the old habit of explaining until you are exhausted. The task is to let language emerge where there is enough safety, curiosity, and reciprocity to receive it. Your inner life does not belong in every room, but it does need some rooms in which it can become visible. The accusation you began with now changes. You have not simply stopped caring whether people understand you. You have stopped believing that universal understanding is the price of living truthfully. You have begun to accept that some people will know your reasons, some will only witness your choices, and some will continue speaking to an image of you that no longer exists. That acceptance is not coldness. It is the end of a long negotiation. You no longer need to shrink the transformation so that others can remain comfortable with your continuity. You no longer need to make your awakening sound harmless. You no longer need to turn every boundary into a confession and every change into an apology. But you do need to stay honest about the quality of your silence. Let it be spacious, not punitive. Let it preserve what is still becoming, not bury what is afraid to be touched. Let it free you from false explanation without making you unavailable to genuine encounter. This is how withdrawal becomes integration rather than exile. You lose interest in being understood when understanding is no longer the foundation of your identity. What replaces it is not indifference, but inner allegiance. You begin to stand beside your own experience before anyone confirms it, and from that place, you can meet others without begging them to tell you who you are. The deepest awakening is not the moment you decide that no one can understand you. It is the moment you no longer need everyone to understand you, yet remain brave enough to be known by those who truly can. If this resonates, subscribe to The Waking Shadow, where we explore Jung's psychology for those walking the individuation path. Watch the video on your screen now to understand why solitude often appears just before a major inner transformation.